Hello, my name is Stephanie Cadu, and I'm Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer. In December last year, I released a commentary on the progress being made on accessible travel. And next month, my third annual report to the Minister responsible for the Accessible Canada Act will be released. And it takes a close look at progress being made in transportation overall. I released this special commentary on air travel because it's a complex system and because of how much attention the issue's been garnering over the past couple of years. And in October of 2023, my own wheelchair was left behind on a flight home from Vancouver or to Vancouver from Toronto. And I spoke about it knowing that I wasn't alone in that experience. And since that time, I've had countless conversations with other travelers with disabilities, with leaders in the air travel industry and in government, with engineers and designers and airport authorities. And I've learned a lot about the progress being made, the innovations, and the ongoing challenges of making air travel accessible. So I wanted to share those learnings with people with disabilities and the broader public, because I think it's an issue that might affect anyone anytime. And the more information people have, the better, because of that complexity in the air travel space. So to set the stage a little bit for today, how do we define accessible air travel? Well, in short, it means people with disabilities can fly wherever a non-disabled person can and access the same services and be treated with the same level of care, with the same compassion and dignity as everyone else, with products and services that are designed for their needs. And it is an issue that affects everyone because anyone can acquire a disability at any time. Currently, 27% of the Canadian population is self-reporting a disability. And globally, 1 in 5 people has a disability. So that's more than 1 billion people worldwide. Today, I've invited a panel of seasoned travelers to discuss the commentary and offer their own insights into accessible air travel. So I'm really excited to welcome David Dame. He's the Senior Director of Human-Centered Design and Product Accessibility for Windows devices at Microsoft. I know Dave travels a lot, so I'm expecting a lot from his insights. Matthew Shaw is joining us. He's the head of accessibility practice for the Rick Hansen Foundation. And Matthew was born with a degenerative deaf-blind condition, and he's recognized as an expert in accessibility legislation, policy, and practice. And I know he takes his share of flights. Jonathan Marriott, Director of Partnerships at AccessNow. He's the Vice Chair of the Accessible Travel Journey Standards Committee at Accessibility Standards Canada, and is the Neurodiversity and Mental Health Community Lead for North America at Open Inclusion. And we're having some technical difficulties. Diane Bergeron from CNIB is supposed to join us, and if she's able to, there she is, yay. She is the head of global strategies and senior vice president for public affairs at CNIB. And along with her guide dog, Carla, Diane is a very frequent traveler. So thank you all for joining me today. Welcome. And without further ado, I'm just going to dive right in and pass it over to you. I know you all reviewed the commentary, which I appreciate. So I'm interested in your reactions. What did you think? What stood out? What's missing? Feel free to be brutal. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. And Diane, how about your thoughts first? Oh, is the sound not working? Okay, switching it up. Jonathan, how about you?
Sure. Thanks so much for the opportunity to weigh in on this. And I think reading through the commentary, what really struck me, especially from my own perspective, is the consideration around who is impacted by travel barriers. And I think one of the things that you note, the lens has almost entirely been on physical mobility. And for me, seeing the neurodivergent passengers explicitly listed as a group where improvement is urgently needed felt like a significant step forward. So I was so happy to hear that. I think for many of us, the airport is a sensory overload zone. And for too long, we've had to rely on personal stories and storytelling, to prove that travel is difficult. And the data is often inconsiderate. I'm really encouraged by the call for better, transparent data. I think moving to a system where the government and airlines actually track and report, as you note, through things like Bill C-52, just means that we can finally move past these anecdotal and actually see if real progress is happening for all travelers. I also noted the mentions of the sensory rooms and the sunflower lanyard program. And these are exactly the kind of small things that can make a huge difference to a traveler. And I will speak to those pieces later on. But I think another piece that really resonated probably most is the point that, and we know this, we talk about it, we've been talking about it for so long, regulations and standards don't change culture. And you can build that quiet room, you can hand out lanyards, but if the underlying culture still treats accessibility as an add-on or an inconvenience, the experience falls short, and we see that regularly. I think that we really need a focus on dignity to be a core part of organizational culture and training. I think it needs to be clear from the top down that treating every passenger with respect is non-negotiable, and that people aren't just potential risks that need to be managed. And I think lastly, I've also been reflecting about, the administrative burden. I read that in your report, but then I see that with my friends who travel and my family who I travel with, and people shouldn't feel the weight of it every time they travel, even if people follow the correct procedures, informing people that they're traveling and their access needs. Right now, there's still sometimes the pressure to justify this, to apologize for your needs, or even, be forced to offer too much irrelevant personal details. And I think that airlines and airports don't necessarily need that medical diagnosis when they can simply ask a passenger, hey, what do you actually need? I think that, lastly, airlines become far too reliant on this proof for very basic access requests. And I'd love to see us move away from this more kind of medical model and towards a culture where we just treat everyone with what they tell us, if they know what they need to be a successful journey.
Very true. Very true. Matt?
I share a lot of the same comments that Jonathan was making. I think when I read the commentary and when I hear from folks, one of the things about the travel industry broadly is like when we're in the midst of trying to get somewhere from A to B, or whatever our role is in that sector, in that system, it's like we lose sight of the forest for the trees and we can't put all of the different parts together, understand how they're working in concert with each other or against each other. So one of the things I'm really encouraged by in the last few years is to see for the first time um, a reckoning of putting together our various stakeholders, our various parts, and actually laying out and mapping out like who are all the parts in the system, what's going on, where are the barriers, and that's really suggests a move towards something where we're actually working much more collaboratively on these types of issues. And the report and the commentary is a tremendous like example of that. So I'm really heartened by that, and to see many different folks who have different responsibilities across that system beginning to demonstrably look more and more into solving some of these challenges in a manner that Jonathan was talking about. One of the things and this isn't a criticism of the report. I think this is about all of our roles as travelers or as operators within the system, is the that accessibility fundamentally is something that we do. And in order to, there's going to be all of the rules of the game. How do we lay the right standards, the right infrastructure, how do we solve very specific problems between these crossover points in a travel journey and so on? The single biggest thing that anybody within the system, including travelers, has to do is you have to practice the work and practice the put into place the policies and the procedures, and you have to train and you have to work and to deliver on it. And just like we'll talk about a bit here today, whether you're working for an airline, you're providing customer service, it takes practice and training and skills to make sure that you're doing this on a daily basis. And the same thing for us as travelers. If I travel a fair bit, Sometimes I make it to the airport with more time than I have on other trips, and that can influence how you act and move through the space. And then I have to look at the ways in which I didn't exactly help myself either, or I didn't practice what I preach on that particular day. So I'm really encouraged by where we're heading. And in particular, we do need a spirit, like we need everyone involved in the air travel industry to recognize that this is a sandbox and that we have to build and test and practice those skills and not be afraid to put this into action just in the airport, on the airplane, so that we have improved experiences for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Dave, what about you?
Great thing about speaking after the other two, they covered a lot of the areas so elegantly and well, which is great. But what I really liked about the report was it really brought visibility and transparency into how far we've come. Like we can all tell stories of 3, 4 years ago, and we weren't even doing the table stakes properly of, hey, can I go into the plane earlier? Can we give enough time for people to prepare my wheelchair, to bring it down, and to do all those things? And we were just always holding our breath, hoping, will our chair make it there? Because what I think non-disabled people don't realize is if they break our chair, it's not like we can get a rental car. Our chair is custom and tailored to us. And so when that chair breaks, everything you had planned for that destination just goes out the window, whether it's work travel. And I think maybe if we could have doubled down on the report of explaining what the impact is to non-disabled people, because it was like, oh, you can get another wheelchair, you can get that. We all get it because we know it's like asking somebody to wear a different size shoes, right? Oh, you usually wear a size 12. Here's a size 3. Enjoy your trip. Like, and and that anxiety it gives to ruin the destination, which is great. But what was good with the report showed was the progress of how far we came. Now I'm fairly confident that my wheelchair will get there on time. But what they've improved on, which I think we could have put in the report too, is they're getting better at when they make a mistake on how to gracefully recover. Because early on, when you lose your chair, they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that's too bad. Well, do you need it?" And I'm like, "Well, kinda. I wasn't faking just to cut through lines." But now when that happens, they're sharing the same empathy, and it's just how they handle it when it goes wrong, which I think is an equal important thing. Because, even if they get great, and I like what Matthew said, the standards and policies are there, but the training for consistency still can get a little bit better because even though they got standards, not everybody's trained. Because I think anybody that's traveled with a disability, the real difference between a good trip and a great trip is how well that individual staff member does it. We need to get to a place where I don't have to hope for certain people that do it really well. And I think we're going to get there because we all need to travel. And if you think about it, we're probably the first generation of people with disabilities that are traveling more frequently because we're, in careers, we're doing things, we have disposable income. So now I think the pressure is on the airlines, where before it was like maybe 1 out of every 20. Like you said in the beginning of the show, Stephanie, we're getting pretty high numbers. So there's more of us. And even though we all have our disabilities, our money doesn't. So if they want our money, they better have a service that we can, have that's accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. You know, I think I think it's easy, right, to sort of lob all the blame on the airlines, and there's a lot of work they have to do, right? The reality is the airlines and the industry. So the point, end to end, there's a lot of work they have to do to better provide service for all of us. But we also, as travelers with disabilities, have a part to play, and I think when we can provide as much detail as we can about our own needs in advance, it sets us all up for success, right? Everybody should review the accessibility section of airlines websites when you're going to travel, to understand what the policies are that are going to affect you, right? And how to request the services you're going to require, because we have to be our own advocates. We know that in life in general, because nobody has exactly the same needs as the next person. So it is on us to some degree to let our own requirements be known right from the outset. And I think that, through this process and what have you, I've learned a lot about air travel that I didn't know. And I traveled for 30 years, but I know now about some of that complexity and why we have to answer some questions about our needs. And so, I now know that the transportation agency's webpage has really detailed information about your rights as a traveler, the rules that the airlines have to follow, but also some really helpful guidance in terms of preparing for travel and what to do if something does go wrong, right? Because some of us have had it happen, and so we would now know, and others haven't, and they're nervous about that. So I've seen lots of comments online about people saying, they're avoiding travel because of fear, because they've seen what happened to somebody else or they've had a bad experience. And I travel a lot and I've had some issues, but setting aside the big issue, right, of the inaccessibility physically of airplanes, and the desired future state, the reality is mostly it goes all right. Mostly I have a good time. It's not comfortable or fun, but I get to my destination safely. And I know that happens for you too, Dave, and others. So Dave, in your experience, right, what advice do you have for folks, like, based on your own experiences? How do people, what can people do to help themselves have the smoothest experience?
Great question, Stephanie. First off, I want to double click on what you said. Still travel. It's not perfect by any means, but to experiencing new things in new places. You've read all our stories, you've heard all the challenges we've had, but despite all that, like all of us with a disability, we've always had to deal with these complex things. Don't let it scare you from not traveling at all, because the world is a very small place with air travel.
Mhm.
Things that I do to really that I've learned, because like I've traveled so much for work and for leisure. A lot of things I like to do is you can't repeat yourself enough. And it's all about the preparation, right? Like, go to the airlines, read what their policies and procedures are, fill out the forms ahead of time. Like, if you have devices, fill out the details to it. Really work ahead, plan, get ahead. When you get there on your trip, be there plenty early, because sometimes you're gonna have to walk the staff through it, because we've all traveled more with a disability than any of the staff. So when you come, have your form ready, filled out, have double copies, have it on your chair already. Remind them to call the stock, because sometimes they won't remember. You got to be your own advocate, but if you're overly prepared, have all the forms filled out, fastened on your chair, ready to go through it. It is so smooth. And when you get to the gate, like, get to the gate early and remind the people there that, hey, I need extra time to get in before the crowd all comes in. Can you please allow the time? Because they will, but you have to remind them, because they're trying to get like 300 passengers in a plane. But you got to remind them, hey, I just need 5, 10 minutes early. And if you don't see the crew that comes to help you in time, just kind of give them a reminder. Because the one thing I've learned is you can't hope for it to work out. You really almost got to be a puppet master, and really, and not because they don't want to or they don't care. It's just time pressure. And I found by having everything prepped, ready, well learned, know what you want to do, get your chair as ready as you can, the smoother it gets. And when you're on the plane, double check and triple check that they put your chair in. But now, luckily, in some airlines, they have apps where you actually get a picture where you can see your chair in the plane. And then before the plane takes off and right before it lands, remind them, if you choose to, have your medical device brought to the gate. Because if not, they'll assume you're getting it elsewhere. So map out your story in your head of how you want to get from there to there, and really be your own advocate, or if you're with a helper, help them over articulate. Because as Canadians, we feel bad if we're always repeating and kind of being a little pushy, but a lot of times they appreciate it because they want to be able to do it right. They just need to be reminded to do so.
Yeah, I think very, very true, very good tips. And I think that piece about being early, that for me is, when you're booking a flight that has connections and you're going to have to switch planes, allow a lot of time. Like, don't
3
pick
hours, 4
don't pick
hours.
yeah, don't pick the 1 hour turnaround, because between flights being delayed or slow or whatever, and then the fact that you need to get off last and get on first, um, you know, and find your way in the airport and maybe use a washroom. I mean, these things, leave that time. Like, don't set yourself up for a bad experience because you booked a tight connection, right? Like, you can't
Exactly.
assume that can work.
If it was
That one
if
for
it was
me.
if it was a perfect world, we wouldn't have these issues. So because we know the world isn't perfect, we just got to put those time buffers in, because it doesn't matter when we get there as long as we get there with everything we need.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Matt, what about you? What do you do?
The Well, there's a couple of things I try to tell myself whenever I'm getting ready to travel, and even after doing it so many times, it becomes your checklist, right? And your kind of way of moving through the airport and the travel journey broadly. Um, the single most important thing from my point of view is the only thing that I'm guaranteed to find at any airport that I go to is me. And so what I mean by that is the more prepared that I am, the more that I have my tools, the more that I just feel confident to tackle whatever that environment is. And if we're traveling in Canada between major airports, accessibility is a growing focus. There are lots of people and teams that are working really hard on it. You're likely to have a more consistent experience than you might if we're traveling around the world or to other countries. So just with that kind of principle, the first thing I really start with is my own like personal system and just my own plan of like, and I actually keep a little checklist in my phone, just like when you're packing your bag, to make sure you don't forget your toothpaste or anything else, is I make sure I've had a quick reminder of the accessibility policies of that airport, or like have I been there, like what do I need to know, or what should I remember, and make sure I'm set up for that journey. Um, when it comes to like technology, one of the real game changers of course, of the past 20 years has been the personal smartphone. And I know it's not available to absolutely everybody, but if you have a device and you're comfortable with it and you learn to use it for accessibility purposes, it will be really useful in a number of different contexts. Like for me, as somebody who has a deaf-blind condition, my hearing or absence of it is pretty stable. The vision needs will vary really wildly just depending on the environment. It's not the same everywhere you go, and so you have to be prepared for like, how is my experience of disability today going to manifest itself in different ways? And just how do I just make sure that I'm generally, ready for it? And one of the things I really like to do, one piece of advice for every traveler, is get, of course, the apps for the airlines that you're traveling with on your phone to be able to do custom notifications. For myself, when I travel, because I trust neither my eyesight or my hearing, I do trust haptics. I like haptics, like when the phone vibrates. So I specifically set up my phone that the only notifications that I get on the phone, and I also wear a smartwatch for the haptics part as well, is just that if something changes in my travel journey, I get a buzz at least once and sometimes in two places, in the phone and on the wrist. So if I miss audio announcements or I can't hear, I have a more consistent experience. If you have ever been in a building, let's say if you're hard of hearing and you've benefited or used a feature such as hearing loops, which are infrastructure built into certain public spaces that can help amplify the sound to your hearing aid. Those are
Mhm.
really great. It's just very inconsistent from place to place. And so I try to set up my phone and to have the app and have the notification so I don't have to rely on those external uh, alerts and monitors as much. One general piece of feedback that works really well for me is I try to signal. If I'm walking through a space and I'm using my white cane, that's pretty easy. The white cane becomes a
Mhm.
signal. But if you're hard of hearing, practicing what's your line to ask for help, maybe learn a couple of words of sign language if you're not a native sign language speaker so that you can approach somebody and say, I would like a little bit of extra help. And you have a way of signaling. One thing I always do is when I get to gates, even if I am perfectly confident that I'm in the right spot at the right gate, is I go up to the customer service, say my name, and just confirm that I'm in the right place. And then I sit down in the accessibility area, and they will remember you, so that if something changes in the next hour, they'll know, and they get better at it. My last piece of advice is when you ask for help in a setting like that, my experience has been at airports over the last decade is people really want to help. Like it's less now about an observation or noticing or whether you're worth it. I think people do genuinely want to help. They don't know how, and they make assumptions, and their ability to deliver that can vary wildly. So when
Mhm.
I ask somebody for help at the airport, I make the instruction as specific as possible. So if I'm about to go into the security area and somebody comes up, perhaps they notice that I'm using a cane, or if I walk up to somebody and indicate that I'm hard of hearing, I'd like a little bit of help moving through security, I will say something like, could you please follow behind me on my right side while I put my bags onto the conveyor belt, and then just follow me through and make sure that when I pick everything up out on the other side of the screening, that I don't leave anything in the bin. I've given
Mhm.
a very specific direction or indication, which will help with some of the bumbling around, or the confidence. And once and that what your instruction might be will
Mhm.
depend entirely on your goals, your needs, and what you want to have happen. But if I can, signal, let people know, and I give very precise instructions, it really helps people assist me in the way that I want, and then they feel more confident with the interaction because you've given them their job, right? Like,
Right.
and kind of help them move through it. So those are some of the things that I try to make sure that I do to always kind of control the situation as best you can in a place that is as chaotic as an airport.
Yeah, absolutely. Not simple. And every time there's something new. I mean, again, um, I've got friends who use guide dogs, and that can be a challenge. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork, um, both internal for the airlines, but also for, like, if you're traveling outside the country, there's different documentation that has to be prepared in advance. And at security, not everybody, depending on where the security is familiar with the rules respecting service dogs. So it's about always having that be prepared to explain the protocol and all that. So I think, you know again, sort of what's coming through here is preparation, right? It's preparation and articulation of need, right? Like, be really clear and directive about what your needs are in a very polite way, but of course.
Yeah.
um what about you, Jonathan?
No surprise, I'm going to continue on that theme. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of identify is, we all have our own experience, we all have our own access needs, but it's so interesting how there's certain tips here, there's certain things that people do, but actually it can apply to many, like travelers. Matt talking about putting the phone on, having the haptics. That's something that I like to do because I want to know, be alerted if there's a change. And it just is one thing that helps manage that kind of cognitive load. So it's so great kind of hearing these pieces. But before I kind of go in and talk about some of the tips, I wanted to start with one thing because I still think that there is an opportunity, and I'm being polite here, an opportunity around finding out official information because it is very often a fragmented experience still. And I think that, sometimes the rules change depending on when you're flying, whether you're flying domestic or whether you're flying international or which carrier you've booked in. And I'm sure many of us have ended up on Reddit threads or whatever social media, trying to find actually what is possible, or I did this on one airline, can I do it on another? So I think there's an opportunity to democratize, if that's a word, this information to make sure that it's easy to find the official information so people aren't left guessing. And I think as I go in to talk about kind of how I manage travel, and I think that in my busiest year, I did 66 flights, and I know that because I have an app which tells me that. And it was really down to preparation. And I think that just as we go in, we are individuals first. We do have our specific access needs, but also we have our own, personal preferences. And I think it's also important to remember that. But, as we push for systemic change, like you said, Stephanie, there are definitely things within our control. And I think my first piece of advice is to reach out to the accessibility services at both the airline as well as the airport when you book. So don't wait until you're at the gate. Let them know you're coming. And also in that instance, as we've already said, you can let people know what you need. For many people, but especially if you're neurodivergent, the sensory environment can be a lot to manage. And one way of doing this is to communicate, as Matt was saying, in terms of that visible kind of marker. In terms of other ways of doing it, for folks, there's a sunflower lanyard. This is often called the Hidden Disabilities Scheme and is available at the desks of most larger airports. I know it's in Toronto, I know it's in Vancouver. And you can get lanyards, you can get pins, or they have badges and buttons. And it is a marker that kind of signifies, hey, I might need some specific support, or maybe I need some extra time. But one of the great things, I mean, there's many good things about this, but something that they've launched recently was they now actually have a digital card that can be attached to the lanyard. So before they had kind of printed ones, and not everyone may want to have a label on them saying what their access need is. But with this new digital card, it's kind of like a contactless. So you can tap it on someone's cell phone. If they don't have that, you can also scan it. There's a QR code, and it will allow the person, it'll take them to a website, so no information is saved, and it will give them specific information about the individual, you who created it, whatever information that that you'd like them to know. And I love it because it puts the passenger in control about what they want to share. And I think I'll be honest, doing all those flights, as we've spoken about, the feedback is mixed because, training varies place to place. But it's great to have this recognized symbol, especially as it's international. And the other aspect about this that, again, I didn't hear until recently, it was actually this week I heard about it. There's a supporter version of this lanyard. So it might not be yourself with a disability, but you may be aware about it and maybe you're an ally, an advocate, and you say, hey, I'm actually very comfortable and I would, be happy to support. So it's a different color lanyard. It's inverted, so it's white instead of green. But it's a great way of getting involved as well. I think some other pieces, in terms of, I recommend if you're not familiar with the airport, one of the things is get to your gate as soon as you can. Sometimes you don't know if there's a monorail that you have to get on or something like that. And I think that knowing where you need to go, especially from, my perspective, it helps to manage that kind of cognitive load. When I find my gate, I don't go to the lounge because it's a very busy environment. So I'll probably find an adjacent gate nearby where I can sit. And I think some of the other things that I just wanted to share, because I get this asked a lot, and it says, what kind of barriers might someone face if they're neurodivergent? And like I said, everyone is different. I want to be really clear on that. But I share this just because, sometimes it's not always been spoken about. And for many, it's about managing the cognitive load. So when an environment becomes overwhelming, like the airport, the brain essentially has to prioritize its functions to, I guess, really protect itself. And it manifests itself in different ways, but for some folks, it could be that they stop being able to process certain types of information. And I have a friend who works in this industry, and I share her story with her permission, and she says, with her and her experience going through airports, if the cognitive load gets too high, she becomes non-speaking. It's her body's way of coping. So that's why what I'm trying to say is managing the load early on is so key. So if you're going through security and it takes you a bit longer, say, hey, it's just going to take me a bit longer to get through here. The last thing that I kind of wanted to speak about as well is because I know there are a lot of folks who are quite rightly anxious, apprehensive of traveling, but there are travel rehearsals. So I know that YVR, Vancouver, offer it, Pearson do in Toronto, and also Halifax. But it's definitely worth checking others. And they have dry run sessions where you can practice going through security, checking in, and obviously not going on a flight. And I think that, again, this is a great way of taking away that anxiety, going through it so you do feel more comfortable. And lastly, in terms of personal comfort, I always travel with noise cancelling headphones. I take my own blanket. I love this blanket. It's kind of tucked inside a pillowcase. So you pull it out. I can then use the pillowcase for the airline pillow because I don't like the texture of that. And it's a comfort. Other small things like an eye mask or earplugs, even wet wipes, whatever works for you. Airplanes aren't the cleanest, and it just makes the journey a bit easier. And lastly, take your favorite snack with you as well. Small things. It's very often a tiring and overwhelming day. So, why not treat yourself to something familiar?
Mhm. Yeah, and you touch on something there, right? I mean, with it being everybody knows their own needs best, right? But the travel rehearsal programs, those are really a good option, and I think they started to my knowledge, the one that started in Vancouver started as a partnership with the Autism Network here to give families with kids a chance to sort of get to know what they were going to experience and sort of see it in a safe and controlled environment before, right? And they are just so popular. I know they do them regularly, and it gives folks a chance to go through the process, and then it's not as scary or as overwhelming on the day of travel. So those are great things to take advantage of. And I think this came up too, right? In at least one or two of you's comments, that you can't assume that just because you've traveled before on a particular airline or on a particular route that it's going to be the same next time, right? There's so many variables, whether you're on a different type of plane next time, or you're at a remote gate instead of at a sky bridge, or the equipment of a particular airline or particular airport differs from the one before, right? How for us who use wheelchairs, how you get on and off an airport or an airplane in Canada is different than in Germany. And to be aware, right? Because those things it can make a big difference in your comfort. Everybody's different about what they are comfortable with. So knowing in advance can help you, mitigate challenges, right? You learn, okay, that's maybe that's not how the place for me because I don't want to do that, or what have you. Anything, Dave, anything anybody else said that spark
what
something for you?
I like what you said there, Stefano. I like what everybody said. Like Jonathan, bring your own comfort, right? Because the plane and airport is not fun. So when you bring in your familiar comfortness, it just makes something awkward better. And I do bring a lot of clean wipes because airplanes can be filthy. So I like to, but to add what you said, Stephanie, there's different airports and different airplanes. No two are the same, right? But also, it's the culture of the destination you're flying into that
Mhm.
you need to know is how is that culture do for accessibility? Because as you know, I do international travel. When I
Mhm.
go to some countries, even though the airport and the airplane is great, just because of the culture, accessibility isn't as, as much as we talk about what's not right in Canada and what's not right in the States, compared to some countries, we are leaps and bounds more mature and more better just because we got ahead of it sooner. And
Mhm.
thankfully, we got you in your role that's helped it. But you need to know what the culture is because it's going to be different. They don't maybe see a lot of wheelchairs or they have a historical view of somebody with a disability. So, like you said, I treat it like the movie Groundhog Day, where every time you go on the flight, plane, airport, you need to treat it like it's your first time. And if you're going to somewhere that's like a different country, whether it's, I don't want to mention the country names, but just
No.
try to understand the culture of it and know they might not be as progressive in terms of disability and accessibility and be
Mhm.
aware of it. Don't let that shy you away of not doing it. Like we've said many times on this call, the more prepared you can be, because we can't control everything, but all the things we can prepare limits those variables that we can't, and it makes it more manageable because the
Yeah.
travel is well worth to do. And even though we're not perfect yet, like you said in your report, I've seen great progress in some airlines, and I want to commend them for that because the lift isn't easy to transform their organization to be more inclusive and to be more accessible. Still have further to go, but I want to acknowledge how far
Good
they.
work. Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's, we all know that it's going to take time for them to create built environments on airplanes that work better for wheelchair users, or that, but they're doing the pieces right. It's coming. They're adding braille to the seat back so people can independently find their seat more easily. um, we know they're working on figuring out how to get live captioning happening so that the announcements made by the flight attendant or the captain can be available to folks who don't hear. It's coming. It's not fast enough, and we got to keep pushing. But there is progress and a willingness, and it's exciting to see that accessibility is now it's now a goal, right? It's a goal of the International Civil Aviation Authority worldwide. It's they know, right, as a collective around the world, that this is work that's important, and and we're on the agenda, and that's a big step forward. Matthew, anything
Well,
come up for
I
you?
just wanted to emphasize something that both you and Dave were saying is if you're just an ordinary traveler with a disability and you're not in tune with what's happening in this accessibility space across industry, is we have seen over the last decade and so on, like some major moves forward. I'm greatly encouraged by the legislative infrastructure that we now have in Canada to begin to apply greater consistency of experiences across entities like airports and things where it was federally regulated.
Yeah.
And we're seeing and I run into bumps in my travel where, that flight experience wasn't the greatest, or there was a little extra annoyance with this one over here. But in general, my travel experience is uh, I don't have very many show-stopping negative experiences for me. So my kind of encouragement to anybody who is, if you've had a bad travel experience in the last 10 or 15 years and it turned you away from travel, it's not to say you're going to have a perfect experience going forward. And I say this with no interest in particularly like in terms of the airline industry, but I say it to you as a traveler. If you've had a bad travel experience that turned you off of traveling sometime in the past, that you should that we are seeing change, there are opportunities, and I would encourage you, you know, if you did have that trip that you wanted to do, that we've never been as well supported to make sure that that happens, and I just wouldn't want anybody to
Mhm.
allow that to shape, you know, the choices that they make. To be able
Going
to kind of
forward,
see the beautiful
absolutely.
world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, anything else you want to say?
Yeah, it's just been so great to have this conversation. And I think at this point, so many great points have been said, and it's hard to not kind of, repeat these things.
Mhm.
I think that, kind of echoing everything that's been said already, but there are also, other ways that you can look at it, diversify your social media if you use social media. There's a lot of people who do talk about their experience, people with lived perspective of disability and their travels. And sometimes that's really helpful to kind of see what does that look like, especially if folks haven't traveled, for a while. And I think
Mhm.
that, lastly, to kind of echo the comments, a lot has been done. I think it's great, airlines here in Canada recognize the sunflower scheme. So it's not only in the airport terminals, but it goes all the way through. And I think that, that's great because we know the journey isn't gate to gate. It really is kind of curb to curb. And I think that would
Mhm.
be my last thought is, we are moving. It is really exciting that it is on at the forefront, and we have people listening in and people want to do better. I think there is still opportunity to look at that whole, we say holistic a lot in accessibility, but that whole curb to curb
Mhm.
journey, because there are so many more moving parts, and people don't necessarily know, is it the airline, is it the airport, is it the third party? And I think that having a process which takes into considerations, because there's so many different touch points, I think that would be my hope, for the next bit. But yeah, there has been some great progress, so I think it is important to recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, last words?
No, one more thing I wanted to add that I forgot to give as a tip. Make
Okay.
sure the person that's traveling with you, that you educate them on the policies and procedures and get to know what to expect. Because even though you know what to do, your loved ones are always going to be like, they don't know what to do and they might slow things down or get defensive on your behalf.
Mhm.
That time to educate them what the process is so they know what to expect. And I guess the one thing I want to leave off is like everything with a disability is challenging, but don't let the challenge get in the way of experiencing those things life has to offer. And then share your experiences too. So not only can we encourage others to travel, but also when things don't go right, share with the airlines so they can start continuing building on their backlog on where
Yeah,
to improve.
yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, thank you. I appreciate the insights that you've given, and appreciate you sharing your experiences and knowledge. It's valuable information. And as I said at the beginning, I flew for 30 years and didn't know that the airlines would like to know that I was coming in advance. Um, you know, there's a lot of information that isn't broadly understood. And that's why in the commentary, I do urge that the key federal departments, the Canadian Transportation Agency and the airlines aim to undertake some information campaigns to help educate people with disabilities on their rights and responsibilities as passengers. I think knowledge is power, and it's super critical to helping improve air travel experiences, both for yourself and for other people with disabilities. So as you all said, we are used to fitting into a world that was not designed to include us. And we're used to encountering barriers, but we're also experts at innovating solutions, which I think some of your comments today show. So, the perils of air travel, but we all choose to travel all the time, for work and for pleasure. And just as you said, Dave and Jonathan, none of us want anyone to not travel because they're afraid. For many, those fears are based in previous experience. But the reality is people with disabilities do travel. We're going to keep traveling. Most of us want to travel more. And we are paying customers just like everybody else. So the industry, society at large, can't afford to get this wrong, right? It's time for faster change. And as a final note, while the commentary was obviously focused directly on air travel, within this next month, I'm going to release my 3rd annual report to the minister, and it will take a closer look at transportation as a whole, including air, land, and marine. So Jonathan, that even goes beyond curb to curb. That goes from the curb to the destination and beyond. So look for that in the weeks ahead. We're going to place a link to the commentary in the comments section here, and it can also be found, of course, on my office's webpage. I hope you will all who are watching will seek it out and share it. And please share this conversation widely. Help us spread the awareness. Help us create the lasting change that is only going to be driven by ongoing collective efforts, knowledge sharing, and collaboration. Feel free to share your thoughts or tips that you've acquired or created based on your own travel experiences. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much again to my guests. And I'm so sorry that Diane had technical issues and wasn't able to join us, because I know she had some great thoughts to share as a traveler who's blind and as a guide dog user. But we will look to find ways to help share Diane's learnings as well. Thank you so much to our sign language and French language interpreters today. And again, thank you for tuning in.